What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Iron Chapel. So this is a video series, a three-part series of how to build muscle, and we're going to dive into everything you need to know about each individual muscle on how to build it the best way you can. We're going to talk in the way of push-pull legs. That's how it's all going to be organized, because I think that's just the easiest way to organize it, and we're going to talk about a lot of different things that involve it. So let's get started. So muscles should be trained according to muscle fiber type. You have type 1 and type 2 muscle fibers. The type 1 muscle fibers are going to be those more endurance muscle fibers that are going to need more volume to grow. And those type 2 muscle fibers are going to be those more powerful muscles that you're going to need more force to grow. So muscles should be trained in the stretched and contracted positions. And that goes for every single muscle that you're going to train. You want to get a full stretch and a full contraction in order to grow that the best you can. Muscles fatigue in the contracted position first, so these should be trained earlier in the session, and then towards the end of your session you should be doing more stretch work with lighter weight just to further fatigue the muscle in all the positions. So lastly, you have three main ways to grow muscle. The first way is going to be mechanical tension. That's going to be with your heavy controlled reps and damaging the muscle fibers on the way down eccentric portion of a lift. So that's going to be mostly for your type 2 muscle fibers, which produce more force and have not as much endurance. Number 2 is going to be metabolic pressure, and that's going to be putting as much blood in the muscle as possible, and you're going to do that mostly by time under tension and a lot of reps with lighter weight, and also with those controlled reps as well. That's going to be mostly for your type 1 muscle fibers so that they get more volume over time and more time under tension, and you're exhausting them as much as you possibly can. The last way is going to be progressive overload. Progressive overload is going to be over time within a bigger section of training, like a training block, as opposed to a certain session. So progressive overload, you want to increase your volume over time, and you want to increase your intensity over time along with the weight, which has to do more with intensity. And we'll talk about that more as we go into each muscle specifically, whether they're going to need more volume over time or more weight over time. One thing to remember with progressive overload is it only counts if you're assuming a consistency with form and tempo. Your reps need to look the same every single time, with tempo on the eccentric specifically, and the amount of pause that you have if you do pause reps. Obviously, the change is going to be in the concentric part. If you're benching, your first rep is going to be much quicker than your last rep, and you actually want that because you want the later reps to be slower, which we'll talk about as well. There's also a principle called effective reps principle, and the effective reps principle basically means that the last 5 reps of each set are the effective reps that are going to build your muscle, and those reps have to be to failure. If you are training to failure, you're going to get 5 effective reps per set. If you train with 2 reps left in the tank, you're only going to get 3 effective reps because you're not doing those last 2 that you need to do to failure. So keep that in mind as you go through all this. That's a good way to think about training and how to grow muscle along with those other things that we talked about. So today's topic is going to be push day. So for push day, you have 3 muscles. You have the chest, you have the shoulders, and the tris. And we're going to talk about the major parts of those muscles. We're not going to be talking about the pec minor or the internal rotary cuff muscles because those aren't applicable to muscle growth. I definitely will make more videos on the smaller muscles as applicable to athletes and powerlifters in the future. But for the sake of this series, we're just going to talk about the main muscles that a physique competitor would have to train. So first, we're going to start with the chest. So the chest has 3 main heads. It's got the sternal head, which is going to be the portion of the chest that connects to the sternum, and that's going to be about 90% of the size of the chest. The clavicular head is the second part, which is the smaller portion on top that connects to the clavicle, and that's a common misconception with the upper and lower chest that people say. The upper chest is really only that small bit that connects to the clavicular head. The rest is all going to be the middle chest, which is the sternal head. And lastly is the abdominal head, which is a small bit of lower chest fibers that connect down on the abs, and these are really only visible if you're extremely lean, because mostly they're going to be hid by body fat in the fibers of the middle chest. So the chest is made up of majority type 2 muscle fibers, so training should be mostly 60% of your 1 rep max for a given lift. So say you're bench pressing, you should be training within 60% of your 1 rep max. The chest has a wide range of origin points, from all the way up on the clavicle, like I said, all the way down the sternum, down to the ribs where the abdominal head connects to. And the insertions are all on the front anterior side of the humerus. So the chest should be trained through a huge range of motion because of the wide angle of movements at the shoulder, as should any muscle that moves the shoulder, such as the deltoids and the lats as well, which we'll talk about later on. So the chest can also perform internal rotation of the arm to a certain degree because of its insertion point on the anterior side of the arm. So the stretch varies by fiber direction, but can be performed by retracting the shoulder blades, externally rotating the arms, and pulling the arms behind the body in the pulling plane of the desired fibers. So if you want to stretch the lower chest, you're going to bring your arm higher, because that's the opposite of which way those fibers pull. And same goes for any other fibers. If you want to stretch the upper fibers, you're going to bring your arm down while doing those other two things. So also one very important thing with the chest is the presses should be trained with a proper setup and form to prevent injury to the shoulders. And that's something that's very important, because you often see a lot of injuries to the chest ligaments or the muscle itself. So that's something that you should do to prevent injury to the chest or to the shoulder. So here are some key exercises for training the chest. Any kind of press is going to help you get really good recruitment within the chest. So we're going to start with bench press. It's going to allow for more fiber recruitment because of the load capability, and it has a bit more stability than some other lifts might have because the bar is fixed and your hands are fixed. As opposed to dumbbell presses limit the load, but they allow for a greater range of motion. So they're going to be better off for getting a more stretch and contraction on the chest. So that's something to keep in mind when programming. Even though the load in the contracted position is greatly reduced because your arm is straight up, there still is a good amount of contraction in that position. Machine presses will be great for building muscle because they can have a better path than free weights allow and a greater range of motion at both extremes. Machines can also have adjustable resistance profiles, which basically means where you want it to be heavier on the muscle, whether it's at the top or the bottom. Like we said earlier, the most contracted position exhausts first and then the stretch position. So these resistance profiles can really help you take advantage of that without having to change the exercise. Those can let you exhaust the muscle at the contracted position and then make it lighter towards your later sets at the top and heavier at the bottom, so you get more in the stretch position. So some machines you got to be careful with because some of them are very good, like those I mentioned that have resistance profiles that are adjustable, but some are just terrible, have bad ranges of motion, bad bar paths, and you just want to keep away from some of those machines. If you go to a public gym, I'm sure you could ask some people there and they'll tell you whether the machine is helpful for them or not. And overall, just try out every machine that you have access to and see which one works best for you. So the next key exercise for the chest is going to be flies. Dumbbell flies are great for finishing a workout because they fully exhaust the muscle in the stretch position, and they're done with lighter weights on the dumbbells. And you really want to use lighter weights because you want to prevent injury to the shoulder or the chest. But these are going to be a really good finisher for the chest, especially if you control the weight. Machine flies allow the same idea as machine presses. They can be good or they could be garbage. It depends on the machine that you're using. A good fly will have a full and adjustable range of motion depending on your flexibility of the chest and the shoulders. But you want to be able to get a good stretch behind your body, so make sure that your machine allows you to get a good stretch. And sometimes they also have adjustable resistance profiles. So next we're going to move on to the shoulders. The shoulders have 3 heads as well. There's the anterior head, which is the front delt, the medial head, which is the middle delt, and the posterior head, which is the rear delt, which the rear delt we're going to talk about in the pull day exercise because I think it's more applicable to those movements. So the shoulders are mostly type 1 fibers, so you're going to want to grow them by fully exhausting the muscles through volume. You want to really fully exhaust those type 1 fibers to get them to grow. Because of the way the shoulders are, heavy weights can be used specifically on the side delts as well, by performing high volume with high weight by the use of partials, and I'll show that later when we talk about the side delts specifically. The deltoids also have origins surrounding the shoulder along with the chest, and the insertions are all at one point on the lateral side of the humerus. Stretching the delts is difficult because of their anatomy, but the best stretch for the side delts would be to fully externally rotate the arm and pull it across the body towards the medial side or towards the opposite side as far as it will possibly go in order to stretch the middle delt. Stretching the front delt can be done in a controlled dip while supporting your weight by your arms. You basically just want to get those arms behind you, but not putting too much pressure that it hurts the arms. So supporting with your legs is going to be fully contracting. The delts can be done by fully extending the arm overhead and squeezing either the side or the front delt. Rotation of the arm will also affect the isolation between the side delt and the front delt. An internally rotated arm will contract the side delt, and an externally rotated arm will contract the front delt. So here are some key exercises for the deltoids. Overhead presses, regardless of the type, are going to hit the entire deltoid, anterior, medial, and posterior, but mostly the front delt and leastly the posterior delt. The clavicular head of the chest is also going to be hit depending on the angle of your pressing. If you're doing straight overhead press, it's going to be more deltoid. If you're doing more of an incline on a bench, it's going to be a bit of upper chest. So the side delt raises can be done with dumbbells, machines, or cables. Dumbbells will fatigue the contracted position first, and what I always do when I use dumbbells is I do a full range of motion until I can't, and then I do partials, trying to drive the weight as high as I possibly can with the energy that I have left. But those will very much so further fatigue the type 1 muscle fibers, which is what you want to do with the side delts. And I think doing partials for shoulders with heavy weight is the best way to grow your side delts. A good machine for side delts is going to keep a constant resistance over the entire movement, which is something that will help keep pressure on the muscle the entire time and give you more time under tension, which is going to help grow those type 1 muscle fibers. Cables will resist the most when the cable is perpendicular to the arm. So this means that when you have the cable low and you're standing right over it, it's going to fatigue the top part, just like a dumbbell. If you have the cable a bit further up and you're standing next to the cable stack and you're pulling, it's going to fatigue the lower part. So typically in my training, I have a combination of dumbbells and the cables that are a bit higher and pull at the lower portion. So I'm fatiguing the top portion first, the middle portion with those partials, and then the lower portion with the cable. And usually with the cables, I don't do a full range of motion. I just fatigue the lower portion. So the last muscle we're going to talk about today is going to be the triceps. So the triceps have 3 heads as well. You're going to have the long head, the lateral head, and the medial head. So the origin of the long head is going to be on the clavicle within the shoulder, and that's going to be affected by the humerus angle within your training. The origin of the lateral head is going to be at the top of the humerus, and the origin of the medial head is going to be in the middle of the humerus. All of the heads insert at the elbow to extend the lower arm. The triceps are going to be 70% type 2 muscle fibers, So you want to train mostly heavy, but finish with some pump work to really hit those type 1 muscle fibers as well. If you're only training one muscle fiber type that's within the muscle, you're not going to be getting the most out of your training. So with those heads, the long head is going to be most active overhead and experience a greater stretch when the elbow is fully flexed and the arm is overhead. The lateral head is most active when the arm is straight down at the side and won't be affected at the angle of the humerus. And the medial head is going to be most active when the elbow is fully flexed and is responsible for strong lockout on presses. Some key exercises for the triceps. Your overhead tricep extensions are going to be really good for growing the triceps. They're going to work primarily the long and the medial heads. The long head can achieve a great stretch during this movement, and the medial head will be worked with a strong squeeze at the lockout. With these, I also do a slight rock back motion to get a better stretch on that long head by moving the shoulder back towards the cable as well, and then pull it back forward and then extend at the elbow. So dumbbells can be used for these, but with cables, they're a much safer option, and they allow you to do that rocking motion that I just mentioned, and that's going to give you a better stretch on the triceps. Tricep pushdowns are also a great movement as well. The lateral head and the medial head will both be worked much more with this one, and the same rules apply as the overhead tricep extensions. The medial head is going to get a lot more tension at the lockout, and the lateral head is going to get more during the rest of the movement. So pushdowns can be done on cables, with the cable at an angle that best emphasizes the position desired. For example, stepping back affects the medial head better because the line of resistance is perpendicular to the arm at full extension, while stepping forward closer to the cable allows better emphasis on the lateral head by letting the muscle stretch more before the arm is parallel with the cable, taking off all of that pressure. So that's a lot of information that you need to know for a push day. Hopefully it was easy enough for everyone to absorb and put into their own training, but that's just some good information on which way you should program certain exercises, some examples of certain exercises, and how to follow that principle that the muscles fatigue more at the fully contracted position. And definitely be sure to stick around for the pull day and the leg day portion of this series, because there's going to be a lot of information in those videos as well, very similar to this one. Also check out ironchapel.net. We have merchandise available. Swole Resurrection pre-workout, which has taken some serious momentum at this point. A lot of people are a big fan of that product, so I very highly recommend trying that out. We're selling samples as well. Just send me an email if you want a sample at ironchapel1121@gmail.com. Also, coaching is available at ironchapel.net. If you would like to be coached by me using these principles in your training and creating a workout program that's going to best suit your goals and needs and your weaknesses, then definitely check out ironchapel.net for coaching. I'm always open to coach anybody, whatever your goals are with building muscle or athleticism or for powerlifting prep, which I am doing for myself at this point. So hopefully this video was helpful and entertaining to everybody. We'll see you guys next time on our pull day principles.